our next guest, Bobby Coffman, is a certified financial planner. He's actually on Scott's team and is just really an amazing practitioner. He graduated from the University of San Diego in 2015. He holds a whole bunch of licenses. And Bobby, it is great to be with you.
Good to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, and Bobby, just in our real short time together, I brought you on, as that certified financial planner, that background of planning. We just got done doing a very basic case study with John and Betty. What sort of things have, in your experience in the industry, what things do people discover through the planning process?
Well, often they'll discover that any process they've been through in the past isn't necessarily planning. It's most often purely asset management, or it's problem solution driven. And the planning itself is a process. It's an iterative process. It's a collaborative process. It needs to be reviewed on a regular basis. We tend to find that people enter an engagement ready to solve one specific problem as opposed to going through a process throughout.
And is it that just somebody would walk into your office and say, hey, I got X amount of money, just invest it for me? Is that what you're...
They might be there in understanding when they enter, but when they leave, they're going to realize that it's much more than that. It's understanding their goals. It's understanding what they're trying to accomplish. It's starting with the end in mind and then working backwards into what should we do with their money. Is investing the right opportunity? Are they trying to solve tax problems, estate tax problems, those types of things? Are they trying to solve for a distribution of assets, or are they still in the accumulation phase? There could be a whole host of things they need to talk about.
And in terms of plans, are there lots of different kinds of softwares and plans, or are they all relatively similar?
There's different types. You would expect software that's going to solve for an income distribution efficiency to be a part of the project. If someone's in the distribution phase of retirement, you would want software that would allow for these Monte Carlo analyses, as what you alluded to before, that are going to give us some probability of success. We don't want to just say pass or fail. We want to know at what level of probability are you likely to achieve your outcomes.
And one of the things I know that I'm always focused on in the planning tools is, garbage in, garbage out. And it's something that nobody ever thinks to ask, and that is the data inputs. Can you kind of speak to data inputs for a second and why they matter?
Yeah, that's a good point. You often will need to challenge those assumptions as you're going into the review phase of the plan, because a 1% difference doesn't sound like a lot on paper, but extrapolated over 20, 30, 40 years of retirement, a 1% difference in inflation, or a 1% difference in return, or a 1% difference in cost, that can have a substantial effect on the plan 20 and 30 years down the road.
And the reason that these inputs vary is when you look at, and I've been guilty of this even in this program, but I'll use slides that have different return numbers because they're different time periods. And so what, in terms of your software and your planning, Bobby, how do you guys determine what range of outcomes you should use? Because like if somebody comes to you and then they walk across the street to the competitor and they run another analysis with different inputs,
Yeah.
They're going to look very different, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the inputs are going to be based on a combination of factors. The first, of course, is the client's own tolerance for risk. If a client has a high tolerance for risk, maybe we can use a higher input. And then we're going to need to look at their particular allocation of assets. If they have a concentration in real estate versus a concentration in, say, large US. From there, we can plug in their exact holdings. Now, we might also be recommending in a second illustration, here's what we're going to see as an output to this if we make some changes to this plan, and here's what you can do if you can diversify. But once you have those input correctly, then you let the Monte Carlo software go to work and you vary those assumptions over time within a series of constraints. So we might use your standard deviation as you're talking about before. So real estate might vary 1 or 2% or 3% points, whereas small cap might vary more than that. So we look at all those variables, and then we can, with a high degree of confidence, say, if you stay the course, here's a probable outcome.
Is there anything that people overlook in the planning stage?
Yeah, well, I mean, the area that we often see is that it's not even that they can see it or overlook it, they fail to execute, right? They'll come to the table with a number of different solutions that have been presented to them over the years from various advisors, et cetera, and they have never taken action because there's too many options, they're confusing, they're complicated. So execution is a mistake that we often see and a failure in the planning process. Also, we see an overemphasis on accumulating and very little discussion around de-accumulating or the distribution of assets, where many of the pitfalls can come into play, and a lot of the things that work for you in the accumulation phase work against you in the distribution phase. And if the planner you're working with is not versed in that, we can have some really problems on the way down, run out of money, et cetera.
So what you're saying is a lot of times people come in and they focus on a solution or an execution, and when you run the plan, what seems like a great strategy, when you run the plan, doesn't fit. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's right. Or even in the execution of the plan, they'll fail to take into account the value of their own happiness in retirement. This is some really interesting data out there and studies that those who have regular sources of income in the retirement or the distribution phase are much happier. So often it's the intangibles that you don't know until you're 10, 15 years into this, and you're stressed about your money, you're looking at your returns every year, you're looking at your values fluctuate, and you're nervous. Whereas if you can generate some level of guaranteed income or floor or security for a client, they're just going to be much happier in the distribution phase of retirement. And ultimately, planning is about that as well. It's not just about the numbers.
Well, that's great. I mean, the value of happiness. I like that. We've actually been talking about real estate, and Scott was just on kind of annuities about how to and so you're suggesting that there's a direct correlation between stress and anxiety if there's an overdependence on equity investments to generate return. That's
right. That's right. It's a behavioral bias. We're ingrained in us to save money, don't spend your savings, but then you get to retirement, and that's the whole point, is to spend it down. And there's a contingent of clients that just can't, right? They're too anxious about spending the money out of quote unquote savings, and they don't have a pension anymore. The generation that's coming up is much less likely to have a pension, so they don't have a source of income, a check every month that they can just reliably spend, and they don't think of it that way. So we have to reframe the conversation a bit to help clients understand it's okay to spend your money. You have a high confidence that you're going to be successful, and that provides them a peace of mind.
So really, there's these two elements of the planning. There's that accumulation and then distribution phases, which are very different in the way that somebody would analyze risk.
That's right.
Correct?
That's right.
Bobby, we could stay here a while. And any other kind of parting thoughts in the planning process of what people want to really be aware of? Are there just like cookie cutter plans where somebody stamps something on, but what's the flavor of what somebody really can expect, and how do we make them more knowledgeable about this area?
Yeah, you can absolutely use a rule of thumb to put you in the right direction, but the reality is a financial plan should be tailored uniquely to an individual, and that in order to get there, you have to go through a process of disclosure and trust and acceptance with a professional. And if you look at all the studies of where clients' outcomes are improved by working with advisors, interestingly, almost all, if not over half, of the value provided by an advisor is in the behavioral component. It's where the majority of mistakes are made. It's in our cognitive biases, our recency bias, our overconfidence. So working with an advisor is often intangible in that those advisors help those clients avoid the behavioral finance mistakes, which are attributable to a vast majority of the problems that we come up with and experience when clients are actually living the plan and sticking to the plan. Because one thing to put on paper, but it's entirely another to stick through it through COVID. to stick through it, through anything that's shocking a portfolio or shocking the system like we see recently, and staying the course and helping clients look back, remember this is long term, and avoid those behavioral biases that can really cause them to trip up.
Yeah, I think we have a question.
So Amy is saying, what percentage is the ideal amount of a person's equity for stock mutual funds investments versus traditional savings?
Well, it's going to vary again by risk tolerance, but in a perfect scenario, and if we're talking in the distribution phase in particular, where we're generating an income, we want their overall assets to be able to withstand roughly 3 years of market downturn. That means we don't need to sell from a portfolio when the market is down. If we can have either alternative assets, non-correlated assets, I think Scott talked about life insurance, ways that you can prevent a 3-year exposure to your portfolio where you can still generate the income that you need to live off of, that's going to set up a client in just about every asset allocation, 60-40 up to 70-30, 80-20, 90-10, for the ability to withstand substantial market volatility.
Bobby, that's great. You know, the big takeaways is that value of happiness and the difference between accumulation and distribution in the psyche of, if you're dependent on equity appreciation to be your mailbox money, you have vulnerability to future events like COVID versus being more creative with the allocation. So, Bobby, thank you so much for coming on. I enjoy it, and we will talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you.